Yeah, I qualified as a landscape architect many years ago, and I went to and joined land use consultants, and I went to make tea. I was tea boy really there, and sort of 40 odd years later, I was still making tea. So hence I moved along, and so I'm now not really a landscape designer much, although my trust work occasionally brings me into play with that. But I happen to be involved in the early stages of coalfield reclamation, which was happening much with LUC at that time. And of course, the coal industry almost wiped away, to be gone by 3 years' time. It was a driving force for the whole industrial revolution, and indeed the pattern and distributions of populations in this country and communications and all that bears greatly on the distribution of the coal industries. It created whole communities. The industry had an unenviable health and safety record, all sorts of disasters, and it left legacies, physical and social as well, of course, as we know. Anyway, this is a personal view of some of the stuff that I've been on. It's going to be a quick scamper through about 70 years, I guess. And the main message from me, I guess, is just to pass it on to others who can understand and enjoy it. So here we go. So I've taken 47 as a starting point, nationalisation, and I've run through to 2015, which is the last deep mine closing. Curiously, that happens to coincide a bit with my own lifeline, and I was born just before 47, and at last count I was still alive in 2015. But the coal industry, of course, has wound right down, and this is a picture I took earlier this year of a coal truck which I thought only existed in Ladybird books now. Wow. We've jumped one, I'm afraid. Let's see if we can go back. There we go. Central Forest Park in Stoke-on-Trent became quite a hallmark, really, for the reclamation of derelict land and the coal industry in particular. But it's worth just considering against post-war pressures in this country. We have recovery, austerity from the war, industrial decline, of course, the age of the auto, which then sprang at us and has created huge effects as well, regeneration when it finally arrived, and sustainability, which of course is riding on the back also of that biodiversity ticket as well, and the broader stories. Anyway, King Coal, 47, nationalisation, a miners' strike in 72, another miners' strike, Arthur Scargill and the lads in 85, last deep mine. Worth just considering the land reclamation programmes which took off in the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s, continued as changed shape over the years, has still continuing, matched up also by national garden festivals which started to grow out of that reclamation initiative. HLF programmes I've thrown in there because they've kind of come to before, and I happen to have coincided across quite a bit of that and been very fortunate to be exposed to quite a number of those aspects. Anyway, these are just a few statistics of how mines and workers reducing over time from that 47 date through the strikes. You see the number of mines closed going right down, workers as well going down with it. This, the 85 strike, of course, of the Orgrave incidents. The closure for, because there were only 51 mines at that stage, and the last deep mine closed in 2015. Instantly, did you all get that? Because I think there may be a test later on statistics. Anyway, that left about 2,000 spoil heaps dotted around the country. And of course, you'll recall Aberfan in '66, which it's now said was always going to happen, and the Coal Board were just not on the ball sufficiently. LUC were already established by that stage. Max Nicholson had established LUC, and they were involved in a very difficult and sensitive programme to produce reclamation and restoration ideas with the community. But I joined and was sent straight off to the Potteries, which was a place without many trees in this polluted atmosphere, and Stoke happened to be, this is 1970, figures of 68 actually here, the most derelict in the way that dereliction was being counted at that stage. But that wasn't the only story, because as coal mines closed, as an individual coal mine closed, land which was operational today suddenly became derelict tomorrow. So you could have those numbers suddenly rising up as the collieries closed down. And of course, dereliction wasn't only coal mines, as we know. But this is an aerial photo of Stoke-on-Trent in about 68. This is the site of the Forest Park, with the coal tips here and the mine head over here. But there are all sorts of other things. So the Sneed is another nearby. I mean, they were dotted around in the Potteries, the 6 towns, and also other industries going on. Potteries, so marl working, shaft tipping, the knotty railway line running through there, the yellow line, mineral lines becoming abandoned, and all sorts of other secondary dereliction taking place in a fairly grotty atmosphere. So the site of the Forest Park there, with the 2 main hips standing up on a plateau, the pit head over here, and then further despoliation taking place as these sites became abused, but were quite interesting socially as well, in terms of the way kids related to these areas. They had a real adventure place to play. Health and safety hadn't been invented yet, so they got among it and learned and developed all sorts of skills as a result. But nevertheless, they were dangerous places. And along came LUC with this concept of sticking a forest park in this, what was terribly polluted, atmospherically polluted place as well, where no trees were growing. And the forest park was started with Lord Robens, chair of NCB at that stage, planting a tree with the Lady Mayor and getting the forest park off to a flying start. Whoops, sorry, I jumped one. So in 73, beginning to look a bit straightened out, but the main form of the heaps retained, deliberately retained. That this was then a cockpit within the city, in a way, a crow's nest within the city. And the Queen came up to do the honours. Cliff Tandy there with her at the opening ceremony. Cliff at that stage was also working on his main book, Landscape of Industry. And there they are, opening the Forest Park in 73. And it was a bit of it wasn't the first, but it was perhaps a good bit of showmanship to have that one as a prominent and quite substantial site to work with. This is a few years later, and you can see things beginning to be pretty well established. But I just want to go back to the Max Nicholson. It was a good job we mentioned Max Nicholson earlier on as the founding father of LUC. Max was really out of central government in support of Herbert Morrison. He worked for. He was chair of the Festival of Britain in 51. He was then recruited to take on the Nature Conservancy Council in 52. I mean, he's really a bird watcher, was Max, and he, of course, later years he became president of RSPB as well. Oh, sorry, go back again. Countryside in 1970, first one was in, I think it's 63, and it was said that it was something that was invented. Your quotation up said that it was the Duke of Edinburgh put it to Max Nicholson to do the Countryside, and Max's take on it was the other way round. It was actually something to keep the Duke occupied at that stage. It's quite interesting. Anyway, we're all watching The Crown. And I mentioned there the William Curtis Park, which you also happened to show. The cover of the publication was the William Curtis Park next to Tower Bridge, which Max used in Silver Jubilee year, borrowed a bit of car park to demonstrate that an ecological park could be dropped in. It had a very short life. In fact, there were some difficulties in then taking it away. But anyway, it was just a demonstration of it. But it underlines some of the themes that were there quite strongly in LUC, that actually ecology was and the scientific end was a significant part of all that. And here we are, Max Nicholson bravely climbing the hill at the Forest Park. This is in 85, he must have had an office trip. And with a couple of my colleagues, Peter Nelson and Carrie Swanwick, we're very fortunate that at that stage there were some great thinkers as well as designers within the LUC stable. View from the top, things beginning to take shape, looking quite good, but it doesn't stop there, of course. In later years, this is 2007, and a little while later, a further injection of monies have produced a massive skate park and playground and other bits and pieces. But, you know, these things have to move along. They're not there in the form that we may have designed them initially. They have to develop, and that's great that actually the community in some way is getting hold of that. And again, an aerial photograph just showing skate park within the scale of things. Circus has come to town there as well, the car park. But you can see substantially that has something of a forest park feel to it. It's still set among the trees. And there are semi-wild places still within it, which is what had always been intended. But I'm going to switch slightly now, because actually the Opencast executive of the National Coal Board was significant in all this. Coal was vastly unprofitable, a loser, supported from central government. Opencast coal was vastly profitable. So it was a peculiar thing when Alf Robins approached Max Nicholson and said, why don't you set up a practice to do what you can do with others, and we have some things through the Coal Board we want you to do. So that was a personal appointment to Max Nicholson in the first place. It came through the Opencast executive. It was the Opencast executive who had the funds to be able to employ and pay the fees of LUC to do the assessment work and the design work on these reclamation projects. So that's how it started. I just wanted to mention Opencast coal operations because typically what you would do is you'd strip the topsoil and stockpile it and the subsoil. You'd start working to dig away. You'd work more or less in a circle and come back to the initial void that you dug in the first place, taking the coal as you went, backfilling progressively, and then topsoil, subsoil and topsoil put back in place. That's the sort of simplified version of it. And indeed, actually, if you look just to the top here, you can just about see this, the white line at the top is the sea. We must be on the Northumberland coast here. And interestingly, one of the first projects I worked on was up here at Druridge Bay, which is near Amble on the Northumberland coast. And such a method was then worked here on quite a large 200-acre site, Opencast site, working around in a circle, but this time working to deliver the final void retained as a lake, because there was a supply stream in that vicinity which could be tapped into the lake. And that's actually what happened. The other thing to remember with opencast coal, of course, is not only digging it all out and taking the coal away, net export, fairly low yields, probably only 5-6% of that total turnover volume, but God's good ground won't go back into the hole with the degree of compaction that he'd put there originally. So you end up with a significant bulking factor, probably about 10% on average, that means that your resultant landscape is going to be a bit more hilly. And in this case, it was semi-super hilly because of an extra void having been left for the lake. So we got this slightly peculiar landscape. Fortunately, it was backing the dunes of Druridge Bay, and therefore there was a degree of topographic entity to work with as well. That was an early sketch plan of the site put to the board with all sorts of ambitious things, because in this phase, of course, we were also working towards a 3-day week. Do we remember that? We were going to a 3-day. We were of leisure for very long weekends and 3 days of working, and then so loads of recreation facilities, boating centre, picnic areas, swimming beach, Northumberland. That recreation provision was on the growth at that stage. Here is that void now just beginning to fill with water, the dunes in the background and the North Sea beyond. On a slightly grim day, some years later, with the vegetation beginning to establish, I don't think it's the greatest piece of design, this at all. I mean, technically it was done, delivered, but I think you would be, in design terms, you would have a slightly different approach these days and integrate it in a slightly different way. But then landscape up and down has also been raided and opencast mined as well, and they've been put back in those rather regular field patterns and shelter belts. But this triggered off all sorts of other reclamation that was happening and now getting into gear, because government grants coming through, usually at 75% contribution to support derelict land reclamation. This happens to be Bagridge in the West Midlands. Turning into, again, recreation is the sort of the beneficiary of that. Low key, fairly low cost technical treatments. But as we move on, the sites become more complex. So this is on the edge of Stoke-on-Trent. This is Parkhall, where there are all sorts of mixed waste tipping as well. And of course, mixed waste tipping, the cocktails that might come out of that start to be more and more of a problem. But this was a fantastic project, wonderful design process in this. So working with Mark Linsell through this and really considering design aspects, philosophical end. It's a fantastic place, and recovering this that was about to be filled with sewage sludge up to nice flat level. Let's even it all out, fill it with sewage sludge. But actually, just round the corner, I think it's probably, oops, have I broken away? I'm okay, am I? All right. You expect John Wayne to come round that corner, don't you? Anything more fantastic. Just in the continuity of this, in Stoke, Stoke came in for one of the garden festivals. In fact, the final was Stoke versus Liverpool, and the final presentations were due on a Tuesday, and the Monday night was the Monday night of the Toxteth riots. So in fact there was no choice in it by the time Heseltine got in front of his sheet. So in fact Liverpool came off with the first garden festival, and Stoke went back into second place and came along 2 years later. But it's in coalfield sites up beyond it. The reason I've ringed here is this is the site of Josiah Wedgwood's Etruria works, with the canal coming through, the steel works that happened later on, despoiled land, and it became the garden festival site. And in fact, Etruria Hall is, of course, now a hotel in there. And fairly good use has been made of in recycling the land. through here. Just listing there the other garden festivals: Liverpool, followed by Stoke, Glasgow, Gateshead, Ebbw Vale. Most of them have produced something. Actually, Liverpool is the one that is at least successful in terms of having turned a corner and done something long-term of value with its site. I just included these things because in my experience, and this is pass it on if you like, that coalfield reclamation work led on to other possibilities, other types of reclamation work widening the spectrum. This is Bedfont Lakes on the west side of London, very much Opencast style techniques. Here, trying to get down below the waste tip, to get back into the London clay, to have the materials to be able to properly consolidate and complete a poor restoration that had taken place previously. Again, recreation is the beneficiary, local authority, Bedfont Lakes. But this thing about land sculpting is quite interesting, because that's the thing that then, I mean, that could nearly be the Forest Park as well, but it's Bedfont Lakes in this case. And round the corner, Harmondsworth Moor, which is just on the edge of Heathrow, was a further, slightly later one, even more complicated in terms of its geography. It had 4 rivers running through it, waste tips gassing away like the clappers, cocktail mix of wastes. So the technical aspect's getting more difficult. And that's the intersection of M4 going up the right-hand side, M25 going, so that's the junction, that main junction, junction 15 on 25. And the scale of it, knocking 7 bells out of most of that land, had already been tipped through the 60s and 70s, and here we are in the middle 90s, having to rework it because it was gassing away, polluting the rivers, being a problem, but crucially on the edge of Heathrow, incredibly valuable for British Airways, top British company at that stage. With no headquarters, they were dotted around in Nissen huts all around the airport, and they built themselves almost a cathedral scale building with Neil's talk. You get an impression of what needed to be done. So it's no longer coal, but it's come out of that sort of thinking. And again, earth sculpting and shaping and ecological messages, all these things mixed in. I just throw this in because maybe it's got the reprieve, but there's runway 3, the blue line running right to left at the top, and that's the Harmondsworth site, so it'll smash straight through it and take it apart again, including Torp's building. And beyond that, again, this is again working with LUC, with Dominic Cole, of course, at Eden, seizing that opportunity of a derelict site and an opportunity thing. Not us at all. That's Charles Jenks, of course, in Northumberlandia. That is an Opencast site. It got held up for most of 10 years in its bidding phase, but it's finally happened. As a piece of earth sculpture out of an Opencast site. So the working method and then the funding to do the finishing levels and the art forms through that process of coal that was still viable in that stage. And this is down Caerphilly, another piece of sculpting on an Opencast site, Park Penalta, which has this pit pony, including, can you see his footprints, his hoof marks coming up the side as well. So things evolve, things happen. Sultan the pit pony, Park Penalta. And interestingly, in the South Wales area, there's been this biodiversity initiative for colliery spoil, which, here we are, the logos, is producing its own special habitats and of value, and that let's not rub out all this derelict waste. We want to keep some of it in its form. It's part of our history, our social history, our ecology, and so on. And that, I don't know how this is faring these days. I think it's probably about 3 or 4 years ago it was established. But anyway, we're virtually there, almost lunchtime. This is the Forest Park. It's happened. Trees never used to grow, and they have done now in that area. But round the corner from where I live, which is West London, we have North Aller Fields with these pit shapes that have come up. So this is another version. These are really Wembley Stadium and White City Shopping Centre demolitions gone in to form these mounds, and again creating open space in the London Borough of Ealing alongside the A40, A40 coming west out of London. Significant because just along the road I used to drive in on the old A40 and I'd come to Hanger Lane where Geoffrey Jellicoe's mounds, the Guinness mounds, used to sit, and sadly of course they've been wiped away by roads getting ever wider, junction being improved, and they've virtually disappeared altogether. There's just the slightest trace of it. So we come full circle. There's our ladybird view again. Keep your eyes skinned because we won't see many more of these. And the Forest Park did happen. Lunchtime.